to know what's in that budget, and we intend to tell them between now and the time that we adjourn and go home. Mr. President, with that, I yield the floor. And
from Maryland.
First, Mr. President, I want to thank Senator Enzi for his patience, allowing me to speak for a few minutes in regards to the 11th anniversary of September the 11th, and I would ask consent to speak as if in morning business. Mr. President, I rise today to join my colleagues in commemorating the 11th anniversary of September the 11th, 2001. The tragedy of 9/11 is forever seared in our nation's consciousness. The attacks in New York, Pennsylvania, and Virginia were intended to crush the American spirit, but instead galvanized it to new strength. After 11 years, the memories are still raw, and the pain is real. It is for the 3,000 people who perished that day that I stand here on the floor of the United States Senate and ask everyone never to let go of those memories. On that day, terrorists showed their utter lack of humanity. We responded by showing the best side of ours. We suffered a grievous loss on that day, but we must remember that we are a strong and determined nation, and we will defeat those who want to do us harm. Many of those responsible have been hunted down and brought to justice. In the case of Osama bin Laden and many others, justice was brought to them. Now, there is no doubt that those who wish to do harm to America know that they do so at their own peril. Today, it is clear our men and women in uniform and our intelligence community will never rest. They will never waver. We have come a long way since September the 11th, and we owe so much to those men and women and the families that support them. Today, we join together to show the world that our nation is united and resolved to defend our freedom and safeguard our liberty against any enemy. We also take time to remember those who perished on September the 11th and to remember their families with a special prayer. We reflect on the heroism of firefighters, police officers, medical workers, city officials, and ordinary citizens who gave their own lives trying to save others. Each of us has been affected by 9/11. On September 11th, we showed the world a brand of resilience that could only be made in America. In the minutes, hours, and days after the attacks, Americans showed their amazing propensity for compassion, sacrifice, and selflessness. Charity, volunteerism, and reawakening of American spirit guided us through those weeks directly after the attack. Men and women waited in lines for hours to give blood. Children donated their savings to help with relief efforts. Community-sponsored clothing drives, and different faith groups held interfaith services. Our response showed the world that Americans have an unquenchable love of freedom and democracy. Now, 11 years later, I stand before you, always remembering the stunning clear day that was to be forever ingrained into our national identity. My prayers are still with those who suffered, those still suffering, and those we lost. But time has taught me that the way to honor the victims of 9/11 is to come together as we did in the days and months after 9/11. On that day, we were truly united. September 11th was not an attack on blacks, whites, Christians, Jews, or Muslims, or even on conservatives or liberals. It was an attack on all of us, and we came together accordingly. We helped our neighbors and we helped strangers. We reaffirmed our commitment to justice and the rule of law. On that day, we were reminded that the best parts of America's character will forever triumph any opponent. So I stand before you today. I encourage all Americans to nurture the best part of our common character. What is that character? It was the selflessness and courage of a New York City firefighter running into a smoking tower and up the stairs when everyone else was running down. It's the composure, confidence, and decency of bystanders helping perfect strangers. It was a sense of country that caused many to answer the call of duty and enlist in the war on terror. It was a faith that people showed in their fellow citizens that allowed for the empathy, not hate, to define us afterwards. On this day, let us not only mourn for those who lost, but let us vow to them to be as good as they would expect us to be. 9/11 was intended to bring this country to new lows, but instead we achieve new highs. Keep the memories of 9/11 in our heart and let them guide our actions. Actions to show each other and the world just how good we really are and just how good we can be. Archibald MacLeish wrote, and I quote, "There are those who will say that the liberation of humanity, the freedom of man and mind, is nothing but a dream. They are right. It is the American dream." End quote. 9/11 was a nightmare. Horrific and cruel as it was, it cannot extinguish the dream. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Mr. President,
The senator from Wyoming.
I too would like to speak as though in morning business.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I've often said how blessed I am to have found a group of people who are strongly committed to the future of Wyoming, the West, and the United States, to serve on my staff. If being a Senate staff were an Olympic event, I have no doubt that I would be the coach of one of the Senate Dream Teams, and I believe that they would be the gold medal winners. I'm that proud of them. Today I'd like to express my appreciation to one of my longtime staffers who will be returning home to run a business in Wyoming. She is Wendy Ganim, and although we're going to miss her, we're also proud of her decision to return home to raise her family with her husband, Ed, because there's just no better place for families and children than Wyoming. We wish them both the best, and we are confident, as she is, that they have made the right decision. Although Wendy has been a part of my staff for quite some time, her family, her husband's family, and my own family have been close for a lot longer than that. Wendy's mother, Sharon, was the one who first introduced me to Diana, now my wife, on a blind date in Denver when Sharon was in town looking for a bridal gown. It wasn't long thereafter that Diana was looking for one too, which means we knew Wendy's parents long before she was born, so we've known Wendy for all of her life. I remember when Wendy was in high school. She'd set her sights on coming to Washington to serve as a page in the United States House of Representatives. It was a difficult goal, but with her determination, her abilities, and her good grades, she was able to make it happen. Wendy's time in Washington as a page must have given her the idea of coming to college here, which she then began to pursue in earnest. So when the time was right, I agreed to write her a letter of recommendation to my alma mater, the George Washington University, as an alum and a Wyoming liaison for the school. I was glad to be of help, but Wendy's credentials spoke for themselves, and soon she was headed back to Washington, D.C. to attend one of the finest schools in the country. Later, when I came to Washington to serve in the Senate, I had a swearing-in reception for friends and extended family to mark the beginning of this new and great adventure in my life. And of course, Wendy was there. It was at that reception that she met the son of my college roommate, Skip Ganim, and they started to date. Their romance blossomed while she served as an intern for me, and it started to occur to them and to Diana and to me how all three of our families could soon be permanently intertwined. What a great gift for all of us. Soon Wendy was looking for a wedding gown of her own, and she and Ed were married. Not long after their marriage, Ed and Wendy moved to Kuwait to work. They absorbed a great deal of knowledge about the culture and the way of life in the Middle East. When they returned to the United States and made their way back to Washington, D.C., I learned that Wendy was looking for a job. At the time, I happened to be looking for someone who could help me handle constituent mail and services, and she was quickly promoted to legislative assistant specializing in the foreign relations field. I couldn't think of a better individual to take on those responsibilities than Wendy. I was right, and Wendy has been a great help with those difficult issues ever since. She did so well, in fact, that I didn't hesitate to expand her responsibilities to include defense, veterans affairs, transportation, and the Judiciary Committee's agenda when the opportunity presented itself. Wendy has worked on so many issues of importance over the years. Defense, with a focus on the United States Air Force and missile communities, helping to start the Air Force Caucus. Veterans Health, United Nations reform, Cuba travel, immigration, and gun rights, to name a few. She is now my senior legislative assistant, a title and post she's earned with her hard work and determination to make a difference. As my senior legislative assistant, she's been a captain in the legislative office, and she's always made herself available to help guide and direct our efforts as a legislative team. She is also there to provide some good advice on the issues that are coming up and how we can best focus our efforts to obtain the results we're working together to achieve. Now she and her husband are packing up and moving to Sheridan, Wyoming, where Wendy grew up. They'll be running a business there and providing some good jobs to the community and some support to the local economy. It's a restaurant, so they'll be providing some good food to the people of the area, too. Although we're sorry to see them go, we couldn't be happier that they're returning to Wyoming. I always tell the people from Wyoming who come to work for me, enjoy your Washington experience and learn all you can every day you're here. Tomorrow, when you find yourself married with children, don't hesitate to start looking for a way to get back home. As I said, and it bears repeating because it's one of life's great truths, there's no better place to raise your family than Wyoming, where you were born, where your roots are strong, and your family's nearby to give you the love, guidance, and support that help to make you the person you are today. Of course, it's no surprise that the place that's calling Wendy home is one of the most beautiful on earth, Wyoming. In the years to come, Wyoming will teach Wendy's children all about being individuals, trusting in your instincts, and facing the future with confidence and faith. It's a great lesson to be learned, and there's no better place to learn it than in the great outdoors and open spaces and magnificent mountains of Wyoming, where life is centered around being a part of the great splendor and creation of God, and with a strong sense of community. For Team NZ, this was a good news, bad news moment. The bad news is we're losing a very special staffer, a good friend and a member of our extended family, someone who has given so much to everyone she has known or worked with here in my office. The good news is we're not only gaining a constituent who knows us and understands the work we do every day, Wyoming's gaining another family that will forever define for others what's so great about being from the West. Diane and I send our best wishes to Wendy, Ed, and their children, who must be looking forward to the opportunity to live the life that made Wendy what she is today. Wendy, we couldn't be more excited for you and for the great opportunities that lie ahead as you begin the new chapter of your life, the great adventure of coming home to Wyoming. We know we'll miss seeing you every day, but when we're back home and traveling around in your area, we will expect to see you at our official functions and when we stop by your new business. May God bless you and be with you and your family. Good luck, Wendy. I yield the floor.
Mr. President, I note the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Kaka.
Jersey.
I ask unanimous consent that calling of the roll be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Mr. President, today marks a time in America that must always in the future be remembered. It can't be forgotten because it was the worst day on American soil in modern times, the worst day. It was the attack on the World Trade Center in New York, Shenandoah, Pennsylvania. The fact is that right here at the Pentagon, there was an attack as well. These attacks put together such a horrific toll that we must constantly be reminded, and we are every day of the year. We are reminded that how terrible this attack was. It was an unimaginable thing. The picture that we saw on TV this morning, if anyone turned on a TV, on almost every station, there was a picture of this strike at the World Trade Center, an airplane running into it. And the first thing that was thought, and unfortunately I was out of the country when this took place, and I heard about it on the radio and saw people in the country that I was in weeping for giant America. So we thought it was an accidental thing. We're not far from an airport, Teterboro Airport, New Jersey, that it was an errant pilot, probably a single-engine airplane. Nothing could have been further from the truth. This was a designed attack on this building with all of the particulars that the terrorists had to have. How long would it take for the steel to melt? Where is the best place to strike? What can the consequence of an attack like this be? Unimaginable, as I earlier said. In my home state of New Jersey, we lost the second highest number of lives of any state in the country. More than 700 people from New Jersey perished in this terrible onslaught. September 11th, 2001 changed our country forever. We see it, we're reminded about it every day of the year. If you want to enter many buildings, you have to identify yourself. You want to get in an airplane, you have to identify yourself. You want to get in a train, you have to identify yourself. You want to get in these buildings, you have to identify yourself. This is a habit that grew out of the fear of terrorism. We have over 200,000 people full-time employed to protect us against a terrorist attack. Though it is 11 years ago, few Americans will forget how that peaceful Tuesday turned into one of the most unpleasant days, most painful days, most heartfelt days on American soil. We still feel the pain and the sadness of that day. And when you think about it, Mr. President, the biggest price, of course, was paid by the families. The families who lost a son or a daughter or a husband or a wife or a grandparent or a friend or a neighbor. The loss was of excruciating pain. We lost nearly 3,000 American lives at the World Trade Center and in Pennsylvania and at the Pentagon. 3,000 American lives in a single day. And I'm reminded, since I served in the Army during World War II, that Pearl Harbor had fewer casualties than did the attack on the World Trade Center, that it outdid the number killed immediately at D-Day. It was a terrible, terrible tragedy that struck our country. 41 states and territories and more than 90 countries lost at least a member, a person from that territory. Imagine, 90 countries, 41 states. 343 firefighters and 60 police officers were among those who died as they answered desperate calls for help. These people were not resident in the building typically. They came to the building. While the flames were there and the soot and the dirt was falling, the building collapsing, they went into those buildings to try and help the people who were screaming and pleading for help. It's 11 years ago, but Americans, many Americans, are still sick, and more than 71,000 Americans are still having their health monitored because of exposure to the dust, to the asbestos, to the chemicals that filled the air. And as we remember those we've lost, we have to have our grief serve as a reminder of our resilience and to rebuild our strength. While the scars of 9/11 may never fully heal, we take some comfort in knowing that in our fight back, we have, in some ways, confirmed our fight against terrorism. Osama bin Laden will never take another innocent American life. But we have got to remember that although bin Laden's influence has been eliminated, there are lots of people who want to follow in his footsteps on plotting against America. And the everyday lives of all Americans have changed forever. We now live in a state of constant vigilance to prevent another attack. I remember not too long ago we used to have announcements that, oh, this is an orange color day or a green day or whatever, denoting the risk of an attack from a terror organization or an individual. Because of 9/11, over 200,000 Americans go to work every day from the Department of Homeland Security to protect us, whether, again, it's the airports or buildings or gatherings, athletic gatherings. Still, you've got to show an ID to make sure that you can gain entry. And so that change made a huge difference in the way we function. It costs time, costs money, costs inconvenience. Nothing, however, as I earlier said, like the loss of a life of a loved one. And we are determined now to remain diligent and strong despite the face of terrorism that is frequently detected in these days. As Americans gather today in tribute to those we lost, we have to remember to keep alive the memories of these Americans, those who perished for being in the place they were in, not for anything they did wrong. And so we have to resolve to continue the work of keeping our families safe, our communities strong, and to be reminded about that. We still see the direct result from that attack. 71,000 people, including more than 8,000 from New Jersey, are currently being monitored for health conditions that resulted from the 9/11 World Trade Center attacks. That's 70,000 people are having their health monitored. More than 14,000 responders and 2,500 community residents are currently sick, receiving treatment from the World Trade Center health program. Many have perished, and we passed a law to offer compensation and health care to those who were still suffering from the results of that terrible, terrible day. And with that, Mr. President, I think that we have to remember that we've got to stay strong. There, unfortunately, can't be any relaxation. When you see places like the Olympic Games or Super Bowl or things, days that mark pleasant competition and fun and youth and energy, when you remember those days, and then you got to show identification. That's over 11 years ago that this was begun. And so, Mr. President, it's hard to take much consolation except that we know one thing, that we cannot stop protecting our citizens, protecting our people, wherever they are in the world, wherever they are in the world. We've seen attacks take place on foreign soil. People who don't know who they are, some knowing that they're American travelers, some know that they're American diplomats. But there is, again, little satisfaction until one day the world turns more sensible and respects human life. We hope that that's never a situation never neglected or forgotten. With that, Mr. President, I yield the floor. Note the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Mr. President,
Senator from Wyoming.
I'd ask that activity under the quorum call be suspended.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. I came over earlier to speak and talk about a dedicated staff person that I had that's going back to Wyoming, but I had to wait about 30 minutes while I listened to the senator from Iowa talk about a Romney-Ryan budget. There is no such thing. Governor Romney hasn't put forward a budget for this group. Now, Congressman Ryan, of course, was the budget chairman. He was obligated to do a budget. He did a budget, something that the Senate hasn't done. I don't think you can complain about a budget when we've gone 3 years without a budget. There's a timeline for a budget around here. We're supposed to have a budget finished by April 15th of each year. 3 years, no budget. Well, the President submitted his budget to us, and that's what we're supposed to work off of in the Budget Committee, and I'm on the Budget Committee. And we've had a little bit of discussion on it in the Budget Committee, but we haven't gotten to do the budget debate here on the floor, which is one with unlimited amendments. But we have gotten to vote on the President's budget. At least Congressman Ryan got some votes for his budget. The President's last 2 budgets have been voted on by this body, and there hasn't even been a single Democrat that was willing to vote for that budget. Not a single one. He couldn't persuade one person from his party to go along with the plan that he had for this country. You know what would happen in a corporation if the chairman of the board or the president presented a budget to his board of directors and they rejected it unanimously? He'd be looking for a new job. I think I've heard some suggestions along that line. Do you really want to continue with out-of-control spending? That's what a budget controls. That's where the caps are put on what the most is that we can spend. And we actually ought to be doing that as we used to do it, where there were multiple year caps and where we would be stuck with the far-out caps that we projected. It's time that we had a balanced budget around here. Now, I applauded the President when he named a deficit commission. That was a great thing. I was a co-sponsor on a bill that came before us here, and we didn't have enough votes to pass that bill here. But the President went ahead and did a deficit commission, and he appointed two outstanding people to chair that budget commission. Erskine Bowles, who was the chief of staff for President Clinton, and Alan Simpson, who was a longtime senator here, senator from the West, member of the Revenue Committee, and they did some diligent work with the commission, and they came up with a plan. They actually came up with a plan for how we could save America. And I did hear the senator from Iowa say, some of these people that are talking like we're broke. You know what? We're pretty close to broke. When your national debt is the same as your gross national product, you are in trouble. In the United States, every man, woman, and child owes a shade over $50,000. You've been seeing the riots in Greece and Italy. In Italy, they only owe $40,000 per person. In Greece, they only owe $39,000 per person. Yes, we are the most resilient country in the nation, and that's why we're being given a little breathing room. But it's not inhaling time. It's time to figure out what we're going to do about it. Now, I really did expect, after the President appointed this deficit commission, that when they came back with a report, and it didn't have enough to force us to have a vote, but it was a report that would solve the situation. They came back with that report, and I thought sure that at the State of the Union speech, the President would paint the same bleak picture that they painted in order to get the deficit report that they got. But instead, he promoted another stimulus. Had he done that bleak picture, and at the end of his speech said, I'm not telling you tonight how to solve it. In 2 weeks, when my budget is delivered to the Senate, you will see what the Deficit Commission said we ought to be doing, and we will do it. And I really think that by about May of that year, we would have hassled through that situation, and we would have adopted most of what they had in that. It would not have been easy. There would have been a little bit of pain, but it would have had a lot of gain. And I think at this point in time, the President would have been a hero. Instead of the question, are you better off now than you were 4 years ago? We really can't continue the out-of-control spending that we've had. And let me give you an example of what we're doing. Now, we're doing it without a budget, but what we're doing, the highway bill, that's one of the most important bills everybody admits for America. We have to have transportation in this country. And the highway bill is one of the major ways that we do that. And it creates jobs, because people go out and build the roads or repair the roads, and it makes a difference. But here's how we funded the highway bill. Now, in the Finance Committee, I suggested that we needed to increase a tax, that we needed to increase the tax on gasoline. That's the tax that funds the Highway Trust Fund, which is the sole source of place that we've gotten the money for building the highways before. But we didn't raise that since 1993, and it ran out of money. Now, the Deficit Commission that President Obama appointed suggested that we needed to raise the gas tax 5 cents a year for 3 consecutive years if we wanted to build highways. So in the Finance Committee, I said, I'm going to put in something a little bit more modest than that to see if we have any support for it. I'm going to put in something that just deals with inflation on the gas tax. And I was told that we wouldn't have a vote in the Finance Committee on it, and we didn't have a vote on the Finance Committee on it. And when it came to the floor, we did not have a vote on that on the floor because we weren't going to raise any taxes. Well, let me tell you what the bill does. There's a tax increase in the bill. We just didn't talk about it. Or no, I talked about it, but not many people talked about it. There's a tax increase in the bill. There's a tax on any private pension fund in America. That goes into a trust fund, supposedly. I have a little problem with what we call trust funds around here because I don't trust any of them. That's to go into a trust fund so that if a company goes out of business, the people who were promised a pension will get at least 60% of what they were promised. That's what that tax is for. That's why we do the tax on private pensions. The Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation guarantees that people will get a portion of what they were promised in a private pension. And so we raised the tax to make sure that that would be there. And then before it got there, we diverted it, we stole it, we stripped it out, and we put it in the highway bill. And we didn't just take 2 years' worth. That's how long the highways, the bill covers highway construction. It says that we will build in the next 2 years all the highways that we will build and how much they will cost. But from the Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation tax that we increased, we took all of that for 10 years to build 2 years' worth of highways. I don't know of anybody that would consider that to be good financial management. Highways are essential, but that's not good financial management. We've got to stop that trend. And we particularly have to stop stealing from trust funds. Now, there is one other source of trust fund in there that I'm particularly sensitive to. There's an abandoned mineland fund. And this is a fund that was set up where coal mined in the West would get an additional tax, which we agreed to and the companies agreed to, and half of that tax would stay with the state where the coal was mined. And the other half would go to the eastern states to reclaim abandoned mines. It's a good idea. Well, Wyoming mines most of the coal in the United States, and so Wyoming gets most of the money on that. And there's another little provision that they stuck in there to affect Wyoming, and I don't think Wyoming ought to be the sole source of revenue for funding all the highways in the United States. But they took that abandoned mine land money and said that that would go into this highway fund. Now that's a trust fund too. And that's kind of done, we heard about it at 2 o'clock in the morning the day before we voted on this bill, and it was a total shock to us that they were getting into this trust fund that's built as a massive coalition between the East and the West, between companies and between miners who relied on companies that went out of business for their health care, and abandoned mine land money takes care of that too. But they said, well, for Wyoming, we think you get too much money, so we're going to strip out the half that you were promised and didn't get for years and years and years and years while you took care of your own problem. And that's in there too, and that's in there for a 10-year period for 2 years' worth of highway construction. So when we say that America's not broke, America's not broke, but it isn't fixed either, and it needs to be fixed. And it needs to be fixed legitimately, up front, telling the people exactly what we're doing. And there's going to have to be a lot of combination of things that have to be done to do it. Now, I have suggested one way that it can be done, and I have tried to cut things before, and I know that if we try to cut a single program, any single program, and we would have to cut a lot of programs, that program will inundate Washington with a few good examples of what that program has done, even though audits of it say that's not really what happened. But those people will flood here. They'll talk to their senators. We'll feel sorry for them. We'll approve the program. We'll continue the program. It's almost impossible to cut a program around here. It's hard to cut the amount of increase that a program gets, let alone make an actual cut to a program or, Lord help us, eliminate a program altogether. So what are we going to do? I have a 1% solution, and that's to take 1 penny out of every dollar that the American government spends and eliminate that, cut that, save that. 1 penny out of every dollar. Now, people across America, when I talk to them about this, say, I personally had to make a bigger cut than that. I could make 1%. The government ought to be able to make 1%. And if the government made 1% for between 5 and 7 years, our budget would balance. Now, that's a lot of discipline, but it's a little pain for a lot of gain. And I'm pretty sure that if we were able to do that, at the end of 1 year, people would say, you know, that didn't hurt too bad. We really ought to go for 2 and speed this thing up. Because I don't know how much time we have before interest rates go up. And when interest rates go up, they can use up all of the revenue that we have from taxes to pay the interest on the loans that we have out there. We have a tremendous debt out there, and we better start taking care of it. And I've looked at some ways to do that, and I'll share those another time. But I hope I don't hear a lot about the Romney-Ryan budget here on the floor when there hasn't been a budget presented and voted on by the other side. You got to have the courage to make some cuts. You got to have the courage to put forward a budget that's on a track somehow to getting us back to solvency. And it better happen pretty fast. And so I think I'm going to feel sorry for whoever gets elected president, and perhaps whoever's going to be in this body and in the House next year, because it's not going to be a pleasant task. We are going to have to buckle down and do the right thing. I got to meet earlier with the new Prime Minister of Italy, and was very impressed with him. He was talking about what he has to do now in order to pull them out of their deficit. You remember that we owe $50,000 per person. They owe $40,000 per person. They are taking the hard steps. He's laid out the plan. He's talked to the people that are involved. You know, over there they have strikes whenever they get upset with the government. And he had to talk to some of the labor unions, and he said, I talked to them, and they went out on strike for 2 hours. Of course, usually a minimum strike's 3 days over there, so he felt pretty good about that. But he said with the changes that he has to make, and it was a reflection on what we're looking at too, with the changes that he has to make, probably none of the people will be there next year. That would be the ones in the cabinet who were sitting there next to him who were just a little bit shocked to hear that. And I think if he does do the plan, I think people will appreciate the way that he's saving their country and that they will put him back in again. But we're looking at some difficult times, and we need good solutions. And it's going to mean working across the aisle to make sure that that gets done. Our time is short, but this is the most resilient country in the world, and the rest of the world is relying on America. I yield the floor.
Senator from Colorado.
Mr. President, I came to the floor to commemorate the events of 11 years ago on September 11th, but I wanted to respond to my good friend, fellow Westerner, Senator Enzi from Wyoming. I appreciate the sentiments and the tone of his remarks, and I respect greatly his financial acumen. We know the training that Senator Enzi has, and I appreciate his call to action, hopefully as soon as possible. I'd like to stay in Washington and continue to work on a Simpson-Bowles architecture. I know my colleague from Colorado, Senator Bennett, has spent a great deal of time as a member of the Gang of 6+2 crafting legislative language to put the Simpson-Bowles recommendations into effect. I did, however, want to set the record straight as I read it and as I understand it, which is that we have had a Budget Control Act that many of us voted for last year, which in effect is a budget for 2012 and 2013. And as I'd like to, Mr. President, ask unanimous consent to include in the record this documentation of the Budget Control Act.
Without objection.
And it, in the language, it reads, the allocations, aggregates, and levels set in subsection B1 shall apply in the Senate in the same manner as for a concurrent resolution on the budget for fiscal year 2012. That language is duplicated below in the next paragraph for 2013. I think I hear my friend from Wyoming suggesting that the process the Senate periodically uses to determine a budget is helpful and follows regular order, and I agree. But the Congress, as you know, in the last 2 years has been at loggerheads. There have been more impasses than I remember in my 12 previous years in the last 2 years serving in the Congress. But we do have a budget in place. It is a budget that reduces federal spending and is a down payment on the hard work we have to do going forward. On the Ryan budget, it was promulgated by Congressman Ryan. I was elected the same year as Congressman Ryan to the House. I have respect for Congressman Ryan and his constituents. I just happen to disagree with his priorities, and his budget proposal sets priorities. It's a template, and if you really study what Congressman Ryan includes, there are concerns that I have that I think are reflected by not just members of my caucus, but many Americans. The plan really lacks balance. It doesn't balance at least until 2040, which is not how it's advertised. And why? Well, there's no contribution from revenue. There's an increase in defense spending. And in my opinion, it requires extraordinary and unsustainable cuts to government services. In fact, the federal government will be cut in half. And I don't think there's anybody who's realistic that thinks that's a realistic goal. President Reagan's economic advisor, Bruce Bartlett, was pretty tough on the Ryan plan. He called it a monstrosity and pointed out that the Ryan plan is backed up by make-believe numbers and unreasonable assumptions. I'd like to include what Mr. Bartlett put in the record, if I might.
Without objection.
But in conclusion, I did want to again underline that I find, as always, Senator Enzi someone who's thoughtful, practical, pragmatic, and I heard in his comments a call to action where everything would be on the table, including providing for greater solvency of Social Security and Medicare, for cutting spending and ending duplication, but also for looking for additional revenue, which I think we all agree we can start to do by simplifying the tax code, reducing rates, and then taking a look at individual tax rates. I wanted to make those comments before I move to my comments on the anniversary of September 11. Mr. President, I was here those 11 years ago. It was a very similar day to today, a beautiful fall day, low humidity. For us Coloradans, low humidity is something we've come to expect in all cases. Bluebird skies, but it turned into a terrible day with terrible events. And I thought I'd reflect on what they mean for our country 11 years later for a few minutes. As we've all said today, and we all know, these attacks are forever etched in our collective memory. We lost 3,000 fellow Americans. 3,000. And it was a diverse cohort of Americans. Every religion was represented, every race, every region. It was something that even as I try and think about it again, I'm almost overwhelmed. But we also have another memory associated with that day, and that was the amazing, beyond belief, selflessness and bravery of our first responders and the men and women in uniform, as well as the resolve of whole communities who came together to help and comfort one another. Late in that day, lawmakers came together on the U.S. Capitol steps, Mr. President, like we did today, to say, "We stand united." During this time, Americans seeking some good to come out of these sheer acts of sheer evil looked to each other and to their leaders in Washington to contribute to a greater cause of unity. Such a dark time, we saw the very best of America, a nation, a community, and a people willing to stand together in the face of adversity that we didn't initially understand or comprehend. And that strength of unity brought us together, and over the last decade we've made great strides in combating the evil of terrorism, and we owe a debt of gratitude, a deep debt of gratitude to those on the front lines of that battle. Intelligence officers, our men and women in uniform, and countless others have relentlessly pursued our enemies who seek to do us harm, and we must honor their sacrifices. And that brings me to this point, Mr. President. Every time a veteran's unemployed or has injuries that aren't well treated or finds himself or herself in a place so dark that suicide seems like the only way out, we failed in our most solemn duty. We must provide the best possible health care, services, and benefits to those few Americans who are willing to risk anything and everything for us. We should be ashamed of anything less. And that's why it's fitting that today, on the anniversary of 9/11, the Senate voted to move forward on legislation to help post-9/11 veterans find jobs. Now, Congress and the administration have been focused on helping these vulnerable veterans find jobs. We've passed legislation. The President has championed initiatives providing tax incentives and grants to businesses to hire veterans and offering veterans jobs training programs. But still, Mr. President, the unemployment rate for veterans of the Afghanistan and Iraq wars remains higher than for the general population and much higher for veterans aged 18 to 24. That simply is not acceptable. We can and we must do better. So the bill that we're going to consider, the Veterans Job Corps Act of 2012, is a solid step in the right direction. We all recognize the obstacles that new veterans face in translating their military experience into civilian jobs. We know that that is the case. And this common sense legislation will attempt to smooth this transition by connecting veterans with good-paying jobs that fit their skill sets and providing our communities with opportunities to hire veterans as firefighters, police officers, to work in the public safety sector, to work in any sector. When our veterans believe in themselves, they're up to any charge. They're up to for any mission. I have the great privilege, I know the presiding officer and I serve on the Armed Services Committee. I also serve on the Senate Intelligence Committee. And as a member of those committees, I want to urge all of us to pass this bill as soon as possible. There's still time. We could perhaps pass it tonight. I could offer a unanimous consent request. But we need to do this, and I'm completely serious here, Mr. President, to provide our heroes with a small measure of what we owe them for their incredible service and sacrifice. But as I think more widely, as I consider what I've heard at home from Coloradans far and wide, passing this bill alone is not enough. In looking back at the days and months after September 11th, I cannot help but admire our nation's resolve and the sense of togetherness we had in facing a shared challenge. But I also can't help but be well aware that 11 years on, we are now a nation at odds. Partisanship is at an all-time high. Congressional gridlock prevents even common-sense ideas from winning the day. And middle-class Americans just wonder when businesses will have the certainty they need to begin hiring again. For me, it seems a powerful argument and a powerful insight that a better future for our country can be and is, if we will hear it, grounded in our nation's deep-seated respect for the courageous feats and sacrifices of those who answer the call of duty. Our military men and women have done their job. The public safety officers in the city of Aurora back in July when we experienced such a terrible shooting, they've done their job. But now it's here in the Congress time for us to do our job. It's not too late for us to harness the gratitude and the admiration that we have for those who've given everything for the United States and come together once again to do right by the nation that they have fought so hard to secure. So as we remember the events of September 11th and honor those men and women in uniform who fought so hard to keep America safe, we must recognize that our actions, not just our words, in the months ahead may be the greatest way to show our appreciation for their sacrifice. So let's employ the doggedness of our military men and women, that doggedness that they exhibit on a daily basis in order to address the shared challenges of our time, to work together and to cast aside the partisan differences that stand in the way of our future prosperity. The American people deserve no less. Mr. President, I note the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
President.
Senator Miles.
I ask unanimous consent to dispense the quorum call.
Without objection.
President, today we remember September 11th, 2001, 11 years ago, a Tuesday like today was, a beautiful day like today was, but a day of horror incited by a hateful ideology. We, of course, cannot afford to forget what happened, but let's remember what can happen when Americans come together. On this National Day of Remembrance, we honor those who lost their lives 11 years ago, daughters and sons, mothers and fathers, sisters and brothers from various walks of life and avenues of faith. We honor the families of the victims. We honor the survivors. We honor the courageous civil servants and first responders, most of them union members who lost their lives and have suffered illnesses because of their selflessness. We salute the service members and their families who sacrificed so much. Since these tragic events, more than a decade later, we all remember where we were on that clear Tuesday morning. I remember feeling the fear and uncertainty when gathering my staff at a location near the Capitol. Regardless of where we were in that fateful day, whether speaking English with a Brooklyn accent or a first-generation American learning English as a second language, or from those of us from the Midwest who speak perhaps with a bit of Midwestern accent, although Midwesterners don't have an accent, Mr. President, we all came together, regardless of where we worked, in a manufacturing plant in Cleveland or a farm near Lima. We came together. It's this spirit of solidarity we reaffirm on this day. Today we must come together again and focus moving forward as one nation in spite of our differences. Thank you, Mr. President. President, I note the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.